Okay. Practically all of the apps used by consumers today are either pre-installed on Apple devices or devices running Google's Android operating system, or downloaded from Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store, depending on the consumer's device. Apps designed for the iPhone can't run on an Android device, and Android apps cannot run on an Apple device. So there are two separate app ecosystems, Apple's and Google's, with each setting all the rules and extracting commissions. And consumers choose which ecosystem they want to use when they buy their smartphone. If they buy an iPhone, they're with Apple for as long as they use that phone. If they buy an Android phone, they are with Google for the life of that phone. As consumers don't replace smartphones very often because they are so expensive, app developers who want to reach consumers on both types of phone must create two versions of their apps, one for Apple and one for Android. And the only practical way for app developers to reach those customers is with the permission of Apple or Google. Unless you are some kind of computer hacker, which we hope you're not, the only way to download an app onto your iPhone is through the Apple App Store. No other app stores are allowed, and downloading apps directly from the internet to avoid the App Store, a process known as side loading, is prohibited by Apple. In every sense, it's what we call a walled garden, and by design, the App Store has a literal monopoly on the distribution of apps on Apple devices. While Google does allow alternative app stores and sideloading on Android, as a practical matter, the overwhelming majority of app downloads take place on the Google Play Store, making it by far the dominant app store on Android devices. Both Apple and Google maintain strict control over their app stores. They decide which apps can or cannot exist on their app stores and set the rules for how apps operate once they are downloaded. As a result, Apple and Google operate as gatekeepers with the power to decide how or whether apps can reach iPhone and Android users. And at the same time, they offer many apps that compete directly with those sold through their own app stores. Of course, this gatekeeper power can and often is used to provide a secure environment in which legitimate apps can be distributed to consumers. But today, we will focus on how Apple and Google can use their power to, 1, exclude or suppress apps that compete with their own products, and 2, charge excessive fees that affect competition in the app economy. As I've said before, just because a company creates a successful, innovative business that consumers like doesn't give it a free pass to harm competition or ignore our antitrust laws. Both companies also offer their own apps that compete with the third-party apps in their app stores, including video streaming apps, music apps, payment apps, gaming apps, and more. In some cases, Apple and Google can build the functionality of a third-party app into their operating system or build an app that is essentially a copy. Apple's App Store terms explicitly allow them to imitate any of the apps in their store, a practice known as Sherlocking, which can render the original competing app obsolete. Both companies also compel app providers that sell digital content or services in their app to use their payment process services. The companies then charge commissions of up to 30%. That's right, 30% for such in-app purchases. The apps are not allowed, and this is something that people don't know, to inform customers of or link to payment methods outside of the app to avoid the commission. In other words, consumers are banned from finding out if they're in the app that they have a cheaper alternative. Of course, we acknowledge that most apps are not subject to these commissions. Most small developers and those who offer apps that sell physical goods or services that will be consumed outside the app, like rides on Uber, don't pay the commission. And they are probably pretty happy about that. That's fine. But focusing high commissions on apps that charge for digital services used on the iPhone ensures that the commissions target on the very apps that are most likely to compete directly with Apple's and Google's own offerings. And some affected app developers are complaining that being forced to use these payment services with their high commissions are crippling their ability to compete with Apple and Google products on equal terms. So just because most developers are happy because they aren't paying commissions, that's fine. It doesn't inoculate the app stores from the antitrust laws if they are harming competition with other developers. Some developers have also raised concerns about the App Store's ability to demote their placement in App Store rankings, to banish their apps from the App Store, to withhold or delay approval of app updates, which can limit app functionality, and to set their own products as automatic defaults. And when we talk about incentives, it's important to remember that the App Stores aren't supporting businesses that just cover the cost of operating them. In 2020, consumers are estimated to have spent $72.3 billion in Apple's App Store and $38.6 billion in Google's Play Store. Applying their standard commission rates to these amounts nets Apple and Google billions of dollars. These concerns have attracted the attention of enforcers in America and around the world. We've seen significant reports on this issue from governments in Europe and Australia, in addition to the House Antitrust Subcommittee's Digital Markets Report. There have also been news reports of investigations by the Justice Department and state attorneys general into App Store competition, and state lawmakers in Arizona, Massachusetts, North Dakota, my home state, Minnesota, and other states have proposed legislation to regulate app stores. And although we can and should use our existing antitrust laws to address these issues, we can also strengthen our laws, including with my bill, the Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act, and the exclusionary portions of that bill would be very helpful in taking on these cases. We also have to make sure that the agencies have the resources to take on these complex matters, which have taken me quite a few minutes to even get to the guts of explaining this, but I thought it was really important to do. But you can imagine if you're actually taking on the world's biggest companies that we've ever known in the world, you actually have to be able to have the resources to do that. So that is actually tied in with this, as are all antitrust matters before those agencies. They have to have the resources. They just can't do this with duct tape and Band-Aids. We all appreciate app stores and the roles that Apple and Google have played in helping to create many of the technologies that have defined our age. That's great. We're not angry about success. We simply want to make sure that capitalism keeps going in a strong, strong way that's fair to everyone, yes, but capitalism is about competition. It's about new products coming on. It's about new competitors emerging. This situation, to me, doesn't seem like that's happening when you have two companies really each dominating in different areas, and where you have companies that are simply trying to do business in their own ecosystems, or maybe with Apple and Google, that are severely hampered from doing it. So with that, I turn it over to Ranking Member Lee, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
Thanks so much, Chairwoman Klobuchar, and thanks for holding this hearing. Thanks to all of you for being here today. The subject of today's hearing, as our Chairwoman has just indicated, is an incredibly important one. For better or for worse, our smartphones have come to dominate our social and economic lives, and apps are increasingly becoming the most popular way to use those devices to communicate, in many cases to make purchases, to stay informed, and otherwise manage our day-to-day affairs. The power that Google, Apple, and a few other large tech companies hold over the way Americans live their lives is itself simply unprecedented. And legislators on both sides of the aisle are right to be concerned and right to be interested in inquiring into some of these issues. One recent example of this power involved the total deplatforming of Parler in January. In a matter of days, both Apple and Google removed Parler from their app stores, just as Amazon pulled the plug on Parler's web servers. They did this despite Parler's close collaboration with the FBI in advance of the January 6th events in order to flag potential events. And in spite of the much greater prevalence of planning of the horrible events of January 6th on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. But both of those apps and their owners, the Facebook and Instagram being under one ownership and Twitter another, those apps remained. Those apps, were allowed to stay on. While Parler, disfavored by the woke barons of Silicon Valley, was just taken down. Millions of voices went silent, and one potential avenue for competition in this marketplace for social media platforms, it just disappeared into thin air. I found this troubling, not just because this was one company that was taken down, but because of the many millions of people who had chosen to use Parler were also effectively silenced in that. And I found it very difficult to get good, clear answers or any persuasive answers as to what warranted this action, other than that they could, and other than that they weren't happy with certain things that happened. But those answers didn't meaningfully distinguish Parler from other social media sites or from other apps. I engaged with both Apple and Parler almost immediately to try to get to the bottom of this and why it was happening. Apple's story seemed to change somewhat over the course of our discussions. But I will give Apple, and do give Apple credit for continuing to work with Parler and eventually reaching a resolution that should see Parler return to the App Store within coming days. And all eyes now turn to Google and to Amazon to see what they'll do. So, like I say, I am very pleased with this outcome. But I'm as pleased with the outcome in many ways as I am very dismayed that it took 3.5 months and the intervention of a United States senator in order to get there. It's dumbfounding to me. These are not the actions of companies that feel like they have meaningful competition. Now, I want to be clear. This is concerning. I'm glad they were able to resolve this issue to the extent necessary to get Parler back on the App Store in the coming days. But it does make me wonder a number of things. How many small businesses, and let's be clear, that's what many apps start out as. In fact, nearly all, start out as small businesses. How many small businesses flounder and die because of potentially pretextual restrictions imposed on them arbitrarily by App Store gatekeepers? How many of them? And how many never even get off the ground? We may never know the true cost of competition and the cost to competition itself and to innovation and to consumers. I also want to be clear that Parler's deplatforming was itself not, as far as I can tell, an antitrust violation, but it might be symptomatic of the immense market power held by a handful of tech companies, including Apple and Google and Amazon and others. When we see this kind of market power being used in harmful, if legal ways, it's only fair to ask whether it's also being used in illegal ways that might harm competition. Sometimes this is what raises the first flags. If you see someone acting with wanton disregard for competitive forces that might otherwise come into play, what else could be out there? If big tech is going to take a side in the culture wars or in political conversations, big tech should be prepared for the greater scrutiny that will come with that unfortunate choice and with that harmful choice. With this in mind, I'm really excited to participate in today's hearing and to get to the bottom of this really pressing question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Lee.